Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. I want to jump right in the show this week. We're here with a friend of the show, but the topic you've talked about, Senator Bill Eigel, is coming to the front of the news cycle again, transportation. First, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
And
Glad to be
number two,
here.
it's like deja vu. Let's talk transportation. You're a member of this transportation task force that's been meeting around the state. You've had an innovative plan from the start that actually does something, not just points out the problem. I want to ask you, your plan is basically to take all the new revenue from the state and invest it in transportation infrastructure. Has that plan changed?
First of all, again, like I said, Scott, thanks for having me here. The task force has been a great opportunity for me to go around the state and get inputs from folks around the state, both urban and rural areas, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback. To your question, absolutely, my plan hasn't changed. I think that we have plenty of revenues. We have a record amount of revenues coming into Jefferson City. What I want to do is better prioritize that money coming in the door for something that almost every one of my constituents talks about being a priority, which is our roadways and bridges. My plan would have put $2.5 billion into our roadways above and beyond what we are spending right now over the next 10 years.
Let me walk through this though. If you take all that new revenue, that's it's hard to bind a future legislature. So if you did that, how long could you could only do that for the time you're in office. Are there some pragmatic points of this that you've been fine tuning? I mean, being in the Senate, being on committees like this, you have to have some new information. Is there anything you think, as far as pragmatically executing more transportation funding, that you've picked up?
Well, I think a big part of this is having a vision of what we need to do over the next 10 years. We have kind of a funding crunch in our roadways because the bonds we took out in 2003 and 2004 are costing us about $300 million a year. If we can get beyond this 10-year horizon, which would include a need to replace I-70 across the major corridor in our state, then those demands will start to ease on our budget. My plan would have provided that funding, and I think that you're right. On one hand, we can't bind future legislatures, but every year we can't bind them to the education formula, but because that's a priority to the state, every year the legislature has come back and funded it. I think if we set out that similar vision for transportation, future legislatures would respond.
So is there any adjustments to any other ways, working with other senators, that you could reach out and maybe do a portion of your plan, but make a compromise? Are there any other ideas you've picked up over the last year you could add to actually add dollars to the system?
Well, one of the things we're looking at right now, I've always been opposed to two things when it comes to transportation: new taxes, higher taxes, and toll roads. And I think that I share that belief with a vast majority of not only my own constituents, but voters around the state. One of the things, though, that we're looking at is if for folks that want to look at a raise in the fuel tax, instead of looking at it in terms of just a straight increase of the fuel tax, I think the route to go is to look at an adjustment of the fuel tax as part of a broader tax reform measure that lowers the overall burden on citizens around the state. So for example, if we're bringing in the income tax rates that the people have to pay and we're adjusting those to offset any short-term adjustments that we make to the fuel tax, I think that might be a discussion that we could have. But as far as a straight tax increase, or as far as a straight creation of new toll roads in Missouri, I don't see myself ever supporting that.
Have you met a serious policymaker that doesn't see the need in transportation?
We haven't. I think there's the good news is there's general consensus that there are more revenues needed for our roadways, and really this is driven by the fact that we need to replace I-70. You know, I-70 could cost between $2 to $4 billion over the next 6 or 7 years, and everyone acknowledges that. The disagreement comes is, how do we get there?
I'm just a simple hillbilly, but I ain't got no trust for the government. However, I think MoDOT has earned the trust of the state. I think if you give them these dollars, you have as good a bet as you're ever going to have that they'll spend them right.
Absolutely, and I'll give a shout out to MoDOT Director Patrick McKenna. I've worked with him very closely over the past 6 months. He is trying very hard to make good use of every dollar that comes out of the State Highway Fund. I have great confidence in Director McKenna, and I think he's a great leader for that organization. The question is, how are we going to get him some help?
Speaking of dollars, there was a big deal over at a Senate bill this year that changed some discrimination laws, made it harder to sue. Part of that, the Housing and Urban Development of the federal government sent a letter to the state. It said that they would be put at risk about $500,000 in HUD funding for some investigators. Am I wrong to have in my sizable gut to think that it's something to do about nothing?
I think that's right, and something I'd like to point out about this. We don't make our laws here in the state of Missouri based on what the federal government wants us to do. We make our laws as a sovereign state of Missouri. about what we think are best for our citizens. The loss of $500,000 because the federal government wants to punish us for not following their regulations is a drop in the bucket of a $28 billion annual state budget. So I don't believe that there's any serious harm or danger to the state because we passed a good law that brings our discrimination laws in line with other states.
If you had to do it again, would you amend it and do it different?
I would not amend it. I think the law that I voted for was the right one, and I think it made Missouri a better place, a better climate for business. Of course I'd do it again, and I don't expect any re-engagement on that issue in the coming session.
Let's talk about not the coming session, but the legislative session after that. You're somebody that's widely talked about as running for leadership. Even in your first term, Missouri has seen several folks, Senator Richard, come into leadership after his first 2 years in the Senate. A lot of folks are announcing. Are you looking at running for leadership in the next General Assembly?
Well, I think certainly it's safe to say I'd like to have a seat at the leadership table. It's difficult to influence policy if you don't have a seat at the table. So certainly I'm a member of the Senate and I do have a voice as a result of that, but if I were to be chosen for one of the leadership positions by my colleagues, that would be a great honor for me and I would happily do that. I don't know that I'm looking at running for one of the top two positions over in the Senate, the pro tem seat or the floor leader seat. I think we have some great candidates that are advocating themselves for those positions, but certainly I'll be looking at any opportunities to have a seat at that table.
I didn't hear you rule it out.
I would rule it out that I'm not running for either the pro tem seat or the floor leader seat.
Explain to a person watching the show why being in leadership in the Senate's important.
Well, the leaders of the Senate are think of them as the traffic cops. They're the ones that determine what comes to the floor, how quickly things come to the floor for discussion and debate, and they determine the flow of traffic and the pace at which the Senate operates. So they play an important role. Now we are more of a horizontal body than the House, so we're not a vertical structure. So each individual member of the Senate has a certain amount of authority to influence the body, and that's how I'd like to see it stay. But we need good leaders at the top to make sure the pace is where we want it.
Speaking of that, you came in, you proved you were a senator. Looking at 2018, there's a lot of primaries on the Republican side that'll probably ultimately pick who the senator is. I get to set up in my little corner up in the popcorn gallery, and to me, there's senators and there's sycophants. You've came out for Cindy O'Loughlin in Northeast Missouri. Tell us about her and why have you been publicly for her?
Well, I've known Cindy for a couple of years now, and Cindy has she has a similar background as I do in that she's a small business owner, and she has had to face the kind of business challenges that I faced when I ran my own business for the past 10 years. She believes in the same philosophy that I do when it comes to smaller government and more freedom, but more than that, she's an independent voice, and as you just said,
yeah.
I'm a fan of independent voices in any body, particularly the Senate, and I think Cindy fits that role.
Will she be one that takes her lead from leadership, or will she be a senator?
She's going to be a senator. That is
Give me another one that you think will be a senator.
I think that if I were looking at the races around the state, I'd look at Eric Burleson down in Springfield, the suburbs of Springfield. He's a House member. He's a strong advocate for issues that are near and dear to my heart. I think he's going to be an independent voice. We also have an interesting race forming out in western Missouri in Rob Schaaf's old seat. Now, Rob Schaaf, I think, invented independence. So we have a couple folks there, Tony Luetkemeyer and Harry Roberts. I think from a philosophical perspective, both of these guys are good. I've gotten to know Harry a little bit better, and I can tell you he's good. He would definitely be an independent voice.
Let's go back to our folks watching on MediaCom in Springfield. Eric Burleson, you know, is a very successful House member, has his name on many pieces of legislation that have become law. You know what it's like to be a senator and the different pressures. Eric Burleson, senator or sycophant?
I think he's a senator. I think he's a senator. In fact, before you get to philosophical leanings of an individual candidate, you have to ask themselves, do these individuals have the independence that's needed to operate outside of not just the Jefferson City culture, but the donor class, all the influences that get piled onto legislators when they take that oath of office. And I think that Eric has that, ability, and I'm very comfortable he's going to make a great senator.
Well, you've proved you've done it. Senator Bill Eigel, thank you for joining us this week.
Absolutely. Thanks, Scott.
We'll be right back on your Opinion Maker panel. Cora Walker joining us after this.
In 2008, Republic Services acquired the Bridgeton landfill in a merger. Since then, we've invested $200 million to clean up the site and to maintain environmental compliance. We do that while staffing the facility 24/7. That's because we support permanent solutions that are safe for our neighbors and clean up the environment. We're committed to doing what's right, That's what drives us every day. We're a part of the community, and we are here for the long haul. Republic Services. We'll handle it from here.
My name is Eric Philippi. I'm a veteran, a carpenter, and a father. When Eric Greitens said he was going to change politics as usual, folks like me didn't think the first thing he'd do as governor was take dead aim at our jobs and our families' livelihoods by working to repeal prevailing wage. Call Governor Greitens. Tell him to protect prevailing wage and to protect my family, not destroy it.
Nobody likes power outages, including us. That's why Ameren, Missouri is investing in new equipment and smarter technology to reduce outages and keep pace with future needs. And it's working. We're in the top 25% in the nation for reliability. And on average, our rates are 18% lower than other Midwestern states. Making sure the power is there when you need it. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. Join our opinion maker panel this week, Matt Lieberman, Democratic strategist. I think with that look, maybe the Greg Keller of the Democratic Party.
Don't tell him, but good to be back.
Representative Cora Walker, welcome back to the show.
Delighted to be here.
First time on the show. We've tried. We finally got it booked. Jennifer Bukowsky, a Central Missouri Republican attorney. Welcome back.
Delighted to be here.
Was it libertarian attorney?
I'm a libertarian Republican.
There we go. And Representative Kathie Conway, friend of the show, welcome back.
Thank you, Scott.
Let's start with a thing in the news this week. There was a thing about SB 43, the discrimination bill passed. Republicans ran on making it harder to sue people. They did. But there was a corollary. And this bill says that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development says this could impact $500,000 in funds for administrators. Is it worth it?
Yes, I think it is. I think the big hoopla, nobody is going to miss out on funds for housing. This is strictly an investigative hearing arm that the money went to. I think they were upset that it said you must come to a Missouri Human Rights Council before you could sue. I think that was probably their biggest stumbling block. They're saying, no, you get to go straight through. It's funny, though, because the EEOC, this is an employment bill primarily, and the EEOC had no problem with what the bill did. So I think that it's something that, as Senator Eigel mentioned earlier, probably won't be revisited this year. I think that $500,000 is a drop in the bucket.
Representative, you were a very passionate opponent of this bill.
Absolutely.
Does this validate your opposition?
It does, and I think to say, considering the current situation that we're in with the budget, that $500,000 is a drop in the bucket. We're having a major revenue issue and shortage here in the state of Missouri, and in my opinion, every single dollar counts. And for something like this, $500,000 can mean all kinds of other things. And to simply say, well, we can just let it go because we're more concerned about pushing forward and advancing policies that allow for discrimination just seems to be incredibly short-sighted.
Matt Lieberman, Republicans run on, we're going to make it harder to sue. They get elected, they make it harder to sue.
I think when you try to monetize fair housing, equal opportunity, and people who need that representation and try to monetize it, I think you devalue the human rights of those people who need the representation the most. I think it's absolutely terrible.
You're an attorney. This bill was designed to make it harder to sue businesses, correct?
Correct.
Did it do that?
I think so, yes. It changed the standard from a contributing factor to a motivating factor. So instead of it being the legal reason being one of the reasons, it has to be the main reason. So yeah, it does make it harder to sue. And
that's what Republicans said they wanted to do when they ran, right? And got elected.
Yes, to have a more business-friendly climate. But this money, this $500,000, doesn't really have anything to do with that. It has to do with processing complaints at a governmental agency. So I'm kind of shocked that we just get $500,000 from the feds to do that anyway.
There was one thing about this. This letter was sent during session, before the House passed the bill. Do you think the administration should have shared that with you before you took the vote?
It probably would have been valuable information. As a former investigator, I always want all the information I can get. Would it have changed my mind? Yeah. Probably not.
What do you think? I mean, they have this letter. Should they have shown that to the legislature?
They didn't show the letter to the legislature?
Yeah, the letter came in, as you know, Representative. Right. They provided, there was a letter sent, it was before the House passed the bill. That seems like something they should have shown. And I don't think it would have affected the outcome of the vote either.
I don't think it would have affected the outcome of the vote. And even without the letter being shown to folks in the House, there were conversations that were had about the fact that this could possibly impact this federal funding for housing. And so there were people that were aware of it.
This would have validated those concerns.
Absolutely.
Well, that's an interesting part here. I mean, if the letter did come in, it probably didn't make it easier to pass. I don't think it changed the outcome. In the future, I wonder if people will start asking these questions. Is there something we need to know?
Well, I think they need to know to ask the questions, and I think that's one of the problems you've got with term limits is you don't have the institutional knowledge you're used to. But I think one of my litmus tests is Senator Sylvie, who I've known since he was in the House, and for him to come back and say that he's made over 5,000 votes, and this is the one he wishes he could have back, he's pretty moderate, and he gets this stuff. So for him to want to recant his vote after having all the information as the representative spoke to him, I think it's pretty interesting.
Let's talk about healthcare policy, something the federal government's kind of wanting a redo on. Donald Trump comes in, ends the subsidies. You're probably one of 5 people I know that might understand what that means. What does it mean?
Well, I want to start by saying that this is yet another example of that administration and the majority party that seems to be more concerned about governing out of spite than they are about governing for proper reasons. By ending these subsidies, by ending these cost-sharing reductions, it not only hurts individuals, but it completely destabilizes the market. And if you are a party that is supposed to be about market solutions and market-driven forces, it makes absolutely no sense to me outside of the fact that he's just trying to do it to try to unroll and put back the progress that has been made by the former administration over the past 8 years.
Jennifer Bukowsky, how many Republicans have ran from dog catcher to President of the United States promising to get rid of Obamacare? Donald Trump's the only one that's done. Yeah, he's the only one that does something to do it, right?
$7 billion to the insurance companies that they're going to miss out on. This will get them to the table. I mean, he's the master of the art of the deal, and money talks. So I think it's a good strategy on his part. We'll see.
Representative, how many people do you serve with right now that promise to get rid of Obamacare?
Well, I think all of us. But I think the most important thing about this is the constitutionality of those funds. Those funds were never appropriated by Congress to be used for such a method. And that's what the president's really trying to bring out. And that overrides, our Constitution overrides the other.
Matt Lieberman, I wouldn't begin to be able to dissect all the actual things about the health care bill and the complexities of it. But I will tell you, and I think you've seen this, you help candidates run, you help them have to work around Obamacare. It's very hard to elect a Democrat in a swing district trumpeting Obamacare, correct?
Sure.
So, I mean, when you do something that, when people fulfill a campaign promise, it gets to be hard to criticize even if it's bad policy.
But I think some of these folks are starting to see that the campaign promise of repeal and replace or anything with Obamacare, if it was easy, it would have already been done. And I think with removing these subsidies and some of the other things that they're trying to do, whether it's block grants yesterday or trying to keep the insurance companies from profiting, I don't think the president knows what he wants to do because every day he's coming out with something different. We're watching CNN yesterday. Even the pundits have no idea what's going on. So if the White House's chief of staff can't even explain what it is the president's trying to do, how is anybody else supposed to understand?
And I want to add. So first of all, the Supreme Court has actually ruled on these subsidies before, and King v. Burwell in a 6-3 decision upholding the constitutionality of said subsidies. That's the first thing. And then the second thing that I also want to point out is that when people are more focused on repealing and replacing Obamacare, and that's where everyone's energy is, there are policies and legislation that have been in place for many, many years that have been bipartisan, that have been neglected because of all of the energy and focus that's being made and put onto repeal and replace. The Children's Health Insurance Program is an example. 9 million children in the United States of America, nearly 90,000 kids right here in the state of Missouri, and the funding for that program has been expired since August or September of last month. And while everyone else is focusing on repealing and replacing, policies and legislation that work are being neglected.
I just think it comes back to the age-old argument. How much money should you take from one group of people to give to another?
Right. And some of the pundits from this move, you'd think the sky is falling, but actually the Dow is through the roof. Wednesday breaking 23,000 for the first time. So I think that Donald Trump is underestimated all the time. And
that's true.
So
we need to have a little patience.
The wealthier
just because the pundits can't figure out his strategy or what he's doing doesn't mean that he doesn't have a plan.
So the rich get richer on paper because of the Dow, but those who need health care the most are going to have to start going back to the ERs for health care, which will in essence cost us, the taxpayers, more money.
But it comes down to how much do you take from one group to give to another?
Well,
right?
in Missouri right now, I think the Republicans and the governor are trying to take, as the president is trying to take away every dollar that goes to support low-income families. So what's left? I mean, it's pretty unfortunate to see what they're doing.
Well, we always have another election coming up, but in Missouri we have another big one in the next 3 weeks in the 8th District. It's a district in Lee's Summit. Our viewers in Kansas City will know, southwestern Jackson County. The Republican Mike Searpoy, the Democrat Hillary Shields, a guy that's ran against Emmanuel Cleaver for 10 years. Jacob Turk was put on the ballot by the Democrats. It's one of the more interesting signs of life in the Democratic Party. A lot of very smart politics came into play. But right before in our last segment, Senator Eigel told us some new polling came out. There is some separation for Representative Searpoy, but it's very close, and Turk has more than the margin of difference. Where's the race at?
Well, are you ready for Hillary? Because that could happen.
I wonder if Lee's Summit's ready for Hillary. That would be the question.
I think it's diabolical of the Democrats and very smart of them to make the Republicans spend money on this race. It's less money that we would have to fight Claire next year. I think this is classic Claire McCaskill tactics. She's a brilliant strategist, and I think I have her playbook right here, the Sun Tzu, Art of War.
So it's the art of war versus the art of the deal. Representative, you know Mike Searpoy very well.
Thank you.
It's an interesting race, but I tell you what, whether it was the 50th district with your new colleague Sarah Walsh, you guys had to fight harder than you thought you would to win that district. Now with the moves of having another Republican on the ballot that the Democrats put on the ballot, it's an interesting play and it shows some signs of life.
Well, I think that if the word gets out that Democrats certainly helped Jacob Turk get on the ballot, that can only help Representative Searpoy in the long run. And I would advise him to never, ever use his opponent's last name. Just call her strictly Hillary.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I think, though, that as Matt was pointing to earlier, you've got a group of people, you've got people in that senatorial district who are tired of the policies that have forgotten about working people, have forgotten about middle-income people and middle-class people. You see that Hillary has a lot of energy around just grassroots organizing, and then when you've got an alternative that is someone that's going to be a rubber stamp on tax policies that continue to take money from people's paychecks and put it to the wealthy, that continues to try to do things that take away people's ability to afford their health care, you're going to have folks that are going to at least have some sort of a referendum on just the entire Republican Party and the sorts of policies that have continued to forget about working and middle class people.
Matt Lieberman, though, it's always funny. It's dirty tricks when the other side does it. It's smart politics when your side does it. There's not 51% of the people in the 8th District that would support any part of the Democrats' agenda. There might be 40%, and Jacob Turk might be how that 40% can win.
So I live in a glass house, so I won't throw stones.
I love the honesty.
So we'll go with that for first. But I think the way that Jeff and the Jackson County Democrats have organized is refreshing to see, especially after the trouncing the Democrats took last cycle. To see Chairman Weber in his place where he is, was a great elected official, ran a stellar Senate campaign, unfortunately lost because of the time. As was previously mentioned, I think that people will be seeing this is a referendum on the governor. And I think that the Hawley and the McCaskill campaign should be paying attention to see.
If there's a referendum on Eric Greitens in the 8th District, he does well. But if there's a referendum on Eric Greitens where the pro-Eric Greitens people are split, the Democrats could win, right?
Well, I think there's an opportunity. You know, the Democratic performance is not that below the margin. And it's a district where there's an opportunity for Democrats to really show their strength, which we've failed to do over the last many
elections. Give me a quick
elections.
prediction. Obviously, it's been a tough time in Missouri for Democrats since 2008. Are these signs of an actual organized effort that will go forward, or is this just an oasis?
You know, with Claire and her people working the party, I think that she will do a very good job at helping lead this party back into the direction of winning campaigns.
Is this real, or is this just blips on the radar?
I think it's real.
What do you think from the other side?
I think it's great strategy on the Democrats' part because they could end up with a talking point going forward to boost morale and say, hey, we're on the verge of turning this thing around. This is a referendum on Trump and the governor, and Democrats are going to win this time. Give us your money.
Do you think this is the Democrats actually becoming organized and pushing forward again, or is this just a blip on the radar?
Oh, I think they're trying to become organized, but I think it's just going to be a blip. I think Representative Searpoy wins hands down.
Real quick, 2018, Josh Hawley, Claire McCaskill, where are you at and where's the race?
Well, I have no idea. I know that he's finally committed to running. I think that he'll make a very good showing. You always have to be cautious with Senator McCaskill. You never know what's going to happen with her, so be on your toes, but I think that he's primed to win this.
What do you think?
I would second Representative Conway. Do not underestimate Claire McCaskill. She has a plan to win. I don't know if we'll see it coming, and we need to be ready for it, not divide our forces like they've been able to do with this Senate District 8, and not take their bait.
Is being anti-McCaskill enough? Or do you have to have...
No, you have to have a plan. You have to actually use strategy and plan. Just having tons of money is not going to necessarily do it.
Where's the, you know Claire McCaskill well, where's the race at?
It'll be interesting to see if the plan that Jennifer was speaking of mirrors the Donald Trump administration's ideas and plans, just kind of what will happen. We've seen his numbers and his approval ratings continue to decline here in the state and across the country.
Do you trust those polls?
I do. I have to say that I do. Just if you look at and talk to people as well, and talk to individuals who just are trying to figure out how to survive and how to be able to put food on their tables, and whether or not they believe that this sort of trickle-down sort of policies are ways to do that.
Jason Kander's Secretary of State's office did a poll last November, and Donald Trump got the most votes of anyone in the history of Missouri. I mean, I'm sure he's not that popular anymore. How could he be? Motherhood's probably not as popular as Trump was in Missouri last November, but he's still popular, right?
I'd be curious what the numbers were in Missouri.
Right now it's 40.
Not as well, not as good.
You know, I worked for Claire in her gubernatorial race, her auditor's reelect, which then converted over to the U.S. Senate race. I have been in the trenches with that woman, and she is a brilliant politician, and she is a brilliant leader. And I think that she has a conservative yet liberal message that does bode well across the state.
What we have to do now is we have to have, with a minute left, who has both those messages and who won the week.
I would say Jet Trilling, Jackson County Democrats.
Smart. Who won the week?
Court Van Ostrom, he actually represents both of those sorts of approaches.
Yeah, very good court. Who won the week?
I think Breonna Lennon, the Democrat out of Boone County.
She did a very good job in that case. That was
got him on the ballot.
Yeah, she did well. That was not the easiest case to win. Who won the week?
Kiki Hernandez and the Dodgers, for obvious reasons.
Love that.
And a big shout out to J.D. McGaugh, my colleague, who is just appointed associate judge.
Excellent. He will I will give one shout out to Kevin Corlew. He's chairing this committee on transportation, doing an outstanding job, and you could tell it's fun to see people with new ideas and leadership come to the forefront. And we hope all of you will come back on the show, and we hope all of you will be back next week on This Week in Missouri Politics. This Week in Missouri Politics, brought to you by Spire and Sterling Bank.